But this is a guy who he's in the not only the Baseball Hall of Fame, he's also in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And he's one of two broadcasters, the other being Kurt Gowdy, to achieve that.
Brother, on the phone with us.
Who do we have on the phone? We have
our good friend, Neil Macchio.
Neil Macchio's on the phone.
Who's been on the show once before. He worked with Bob Wolff for many years. I believe it was at News 12 Long Island, right, Neil?
Yes, I actually started my career off as a production assistant for Bob.
Perfect timing, Neil Macchio.
Perfect timing, Neil Macchio. We've been talking about having you on the air, and this is the perfect time. We're going to have you on another time, too. But you worked with Bob. From what I've heard about him, I've only met him twice. I used to work at, well, I still do technically, a place called Rainbow Network Communications, and was in Floral Park. And he used to do stories sometimes on Long Island. Instead of going out all the way out to Woodbury, since he lived up in Westchester, he would edit the show, the bit in our building, and then send it over to News 12. So, but what do you remember about him, Neil?
Well, obviously you guys have probably gone over all the accolades.
Actually, we just started when you called.
Series and all that stuff already. So the thing that I would say, my biggest takeaway from working with Bob is he was the nicest man in the media that I've ever met or ever worked with. And I think you're going to hear that from a lot of people in the next few days.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's besides being a guy who did everything and is like we said before, is in the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Basketball Hall of Fame. That was one thing that everybody seemed to agree on with Bob Wolff, is that he was just such a nice guy, and he had time for people. He was always willing to try to help somebody. Yeah.
You could talk to other sportscasters, in this area like Bruce Beck and Warner Wolf, and all these guys will tell you that he was always accessible. He always made time to critique their tapes, tried to help them out where he could. He worked with, there were kids that went to the sportscaster camp that they used to have. I think it was at Rutgers or one of the local colleges. Mm-hmm. And they would all go there, and he would help instruct them, give them pointers, talk to them, lecture them, mentor them. And like I said, I don't think there's anybody in this business that I've ever worked with that was as nice a guy as he was. So that's my biggest takeaway, because, you could call a game. Many guys have called World Series, Olympics, whatnot. But when you come away with working from someone where that person actually cares about you and helps you, to me that's bigger than anything else that you're going to hear in this business.
Well, my favorite story of Bob Wolff that I've heard over the past weekend, there was when he was calling the Senators games and he was doing beer commercials.
Yes,
and
yes.
He decided that he should drink the beer to because he's doing the advertising, and he would get he would get a little, not messy, but he would get a little affected from doing the live beer commercials.
One thing about Bob is, people think of him in terms of being old school, like back with the Mel Allens, the Russ Hodges.
Sure.
But those guys took themselves very seriously. One thing about Bob is he was always willing to have fun, do something a little different to get attention. So he's kind of like, to me, the bridge from the old school announcer to this era of the excitable, over-the-top announcers. And he was somewhere in between, because even though he was old school, he still tried to have fun, get your attention, do something comedic. And I think that's another thing I'd remember him for, because he would somehow get interviews with, like, Ted Williams or Mickey Mantle and get them to loosen up and actually, joke around with him, where other interviewers of that era were very serious, and it was always like the straight sportscaster type of thing. But he always had fun with his interviews.
You have to. It's sports. I mean, that's what it always comes back to for me, is that you shouldn't take it so seriously that you can't have fun with it.
But
right.
back then they did.
Here's a guy that called the 56 World Series, but yet he did the dog show as well.
Right, Westminster
and
Dog Show.
And he would be interviewing dogs, as a group. So, that's what I mean by he liked to have fun, and that's what kind of set him aside from, like, the Mel Allens, who were always very straight-laced and,
Yeah, talk about taking it seriously. Him and Red Barber and guys like that.
Maybe you could, add John Sterling to that list a little bit, because Sterling has fun with his home run calls. So he's still a little bit of that same Bob Wolff mentality.
Well, I don't see John Sterling playing a ukulele.
You're not seeing the pained look on my
and
face.
I'm not sure John Sterling's going to the Hall of Fame. But
well, maybe Susan plays the ukulele. I don't know.
I think Susan.
By the way, Big Ed joining us in the studio.
Much.
Oh, Big Ed! Big Ed sighting. My God,
how you doing, Much?
This is the Music Radio in Ed's basement. A recap here. What did you learn just from observation from working with Bob at News 12? I mean, how he put a story together or anything like that?
Well, for me, it was more people skills. How, Bob knew everyone. He had connections, and he knew how, in this day and age, you would say you knew how to work people. But he didn't have to work them because he had already made those contacts. He was just, like I said, being a nice guy and, being open to accepting people. And, like some announcers are very set in their ways. He wasn't. He could always, tell you a story from any walk of life and, bridge that gap between generations. Because don't forget, here he is. I mean, when I was working with him, he was 60, 70 years old already, and he had young kids working for him, and he got them to open up and help him out. So, later on now, when he's in his 90s and still in the business, think of all those generations of kids that he mentored throughout those years.
Yeah, and
I mean, the one thing that really kind of blows your mind is when I was reading the story about him in the Post today. I mean, he interviewed Babe Ruth.
Yeah,
think about that. Think about how many years that is.
He's the only guy to interview both Babe Ruth and Derek Jeter.
Right.
I mean, think about that. Generations.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, when you just think about that, and obviously you think about Babe Ruth, 1927 is the year for Babe Ruth.
Right.
I'm not.
Well, he wasn't there.
He wasn't. I know he wasn't there back then.
It was
but
like 43, 44.
Yeah, I mean, but
around.
still, Babe Ruth was still alive and still able to be interviewed, and that was what Bob Wolff did. I mean,
picture they have in the Daily News.
It's a shame he's not around to interview Aaron Judge.
Yeah,
that's
he would have liked
the next lineage in the Yankee chain.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's true. There's a picture in today's Daily News of Bob wearing the reporter hat, which I think Tim should be wearing. There's Babe Ruth looks like he's like, it was like 1945. It was for INS. I think it was for INS. But Bob did everything. I remember, all I've heard is nice things about him, and not like showbiz nice things. Truly nice things, like he helped me start my career, and I know he helped you with your career and everything. Just truly a nice guy. Neil, thanks for calling in. We're running out of time. I apologize. We only have you for a couple of minutes. Neil Macchio,
no problem, guys.
who's been on the show before. And Neil, you going to come back soon, or what's the deal?
Yeah, let me know whenever you need me.
Okay, we'll have Neil back on for a whole show like he did a couple of years ago. Because, he's a big-time sports guy.
Big-time sports
Working at MSG right now. Talk to you later, Neil.
All right.
Thanks,
Talk to you. Bye. That is Neil Macchio, producer over at MSG. Started out at News 12 Long Island.
Bob Wolff it is a sad day in the broadcasting world. I mean, Bob Wolff.
Well, one thing I as an archivist myself, brother,
amateur, yes,
yes, but Bob a couple of years ago donated 1,400 interviews and discs and stuff to the Library of Congress.
Yes,
there was something I saw on the New York Times site they had one of the interviews with Mickey Mantle, and Mickey is being interviewed. And Bob goes, "Oh, Casey Stengel just got hit in the head with a ball," and Mickey goes, "Oh, don't worry, he has a hard head."
Yeah, but I mean that Mickey wasn't. A lot of people have this idea of Mickey Mantle as this aw shucks, friendly, gregarious kind of guy. He wasn't really friendly with the media.
No, he wasn't.
Because I mean, obviously, back then, between the home run race with Maris and the expectations that the press put on him, he had a lot of contentious times with the media, and there was a lot of profanity involved from Mickey's standpoint. When a lot of times he just didn't feel like talking to the press. But when you're Mickey Mantle, that's part of the job description. Just like with Derek Jeter,
he'd be treated differently.
Description.
He'd be treated differently, and he probably wouldn't be hammered all the time, or the way he drank, he probably wouldn't be that way.
It's revisionist history. And
a little bit.
Back in the day, that's how it went.
That's how it went. Quickly, brother, we have about 4 minutes left.
Ooh.
What do you want to talk about next?
We didn't get to any Knicks stuff.
No, we didn't. You want to talk about Knicks?
Really quickly. First of all, the Knicks have reached an agreement to hire Scott Perry as their new GM, but that is contingent on reaching another agreement, this one with the Sacramento Kings, on compensation for Perry, who was hired as Sacramento's vice president of basketball operations just 3 months ago. The Knicks were looking for a GM who did not want to overhaul their dysfunctional staff. Because why would you want to get rid of the dysfunction that is the Knicks? So the other bizarre thing about this assumed hiring is that he's not going to really be in charge of basketball operations because Steve Mills is going to be
the new guy,
the new president.
He's the new big shot.
So I'm not really sure what the Knicks are doing, and they're calling it a culture change, which is incredible because again, Scott Perry is not going to be able to bring in his own people.
Right.
The Knicks are going to be keeping the same scouting staff and the same. Everybody else is going to be the same. So how do you affect a culture change with one person? It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
And for the Knicks to insist that it will is delusional. So good luck, Knicks. But
you're being kind, brother. You're being kind.
So former Cavaliers general manager David Griffin pulled his name out of the front office search last week. The sources were saying that the Knicks and Griffin were at odds over Griffin not having full authority on basketball decisions because he'd be working for Steve Mills, which is part of the problem. And Steve Mills, as we know, was the guy who gave Tim Hardaway Jr. the 4-year, $71 million contract.
Yep.
That is still drawing gasps around NBA circles. And then apparently Steve Mills was not at the press conference to introduce Tim Hardaway Jr.
If you're going to be the guy, the guy, you have to show up and take the credit or take the hit from the press because they're going to be asking you questions.
Exactly.
And he didn't want to answer questions. That's why he wasn't there.
And that's something that Phil Jackson did. That apparently, if Steve Mills is going to inherit that perspective towards the press,
right,
then the Knicks are not going to do any better. It's
nope.
That especially is a franchise that people have so much passion for, and that franchise needs to answer to the fans, and they're not, and they haven't, and that is it's just not it's not good for business.
Yeah, well.
How much time do we have?
We got a minute left. You want to talk about Tottenham very quickly?
Yes, I want to talk about Tottenham sold defender Kyle Walker to Manchester City last week on Friday for a record £50 million.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And I want to say that this is a good bit of business, and I will tell you why. The figure, first of all, is a record both for a defender and for an English player. Foolish people think this is a bad move, and the reason that it's not a bad move is because Tottenham manager Mauricio Pochettino wanted Walker out. I won't get into the details, but let's just say they had a falling out late in the season, and Walker was going to be sold. So not only did Tottenham sell a player for a record fee who they wanted to get rid of, but now they have £50 million to go out and buy a couple of players. So things are good. Tottenham is taking their time with the window, and we'll see what happens with that. Manchester United, on the other hand, spent £90 million on Romelu Lukaku last week for buying him from Everton. And then Wayne Rooney, the Manchester United legend, actually goes back to Everton, and that's where it all started.
Just quickly, brother.
Yes, brother.
It's £50 million, and that doesn't include the salary they got to pay the guy.
Exactly.
So it's just crazy.
Walker
crazy.
actually doubles his salary to $140,000 a week.
That's crazy. We got to get out of here. You've been listening to From the Press Box. We're here every Monday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. My name is Rob Leonard. With me is award-winning sports writer and my brother, Tim Leonard. Tim, you're on Twitter at
Real Tim Leonard.
The opinions expressed on air are not necessarily those of WHPC, its management, or Nassau Community College.
Responsible opposing viewpoints will be considered by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu or by mail to WHPC 1 Education Drive, Garden City, New York, 11530.
Thanks for listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.